The dust in the Korengal Valley doesn't just coat your skin, it buries your secrets. In 2014, a classified extraction mission went sideways in the most catastrophic way possible. A Tier 1 SEAL team found themselves pinned down, outgunned, and running low on ammo, protecting a civilian nurse they considered a liability. They thought she was fragile. They thought she was just there to patch wounds. They were wrong. When the line broke and the enemy surged, that nurse didn't hide. She picked up a fallen Mk-18 and showed them that the deadliest thing on that battlefield wasn't a SEAL. It was her. This is the story the Pentagon tried to bury. Korengal Valley, Afghanistan, October 2014. The rotors of the Chinook beat a deafening rhythm against the thin air of the Hindu Kush, a sound that usually signaled salvation, but tonight only signaled a headache for Master Chief Jack Miller. He sat on the edge of the ramp, his boots dangling over the dark void of the valley below, the red glow of the cabin lights reflecting off his night vision goggles. He chewed his tobacco aggressively, spitting into a plastic bottle, his eyes scanning the silhouette of the woman sitting opposite him. She didn't look like she belonged in a war zone. She looked like she belonged in a suburban library or a pediatric ward handing out lollipops. Her name was Eudora Brooks. According to the briefing dossier Miller had skimmed 10 minutes before Wheels Up, she was a volunteer trauma nurse with Doctors Without Borders, currently attached to a humanitarian aid team that had gotten itself stranded in a village known for being a hotbed of Taliban activity. Intelligence suggested a high-value target, a warlord named Khalid al-Zaruni, was moving into the area, and Command wanted the Americans out before the drone strikes started leveling the grid. Eyes on the package. Chief Lieutenant Graves's voice crackled over the comms. Graves was the platoon commander, a man who respected protocol more than Miller respected breathing. "Yeah, I see her," Miller grunted, keying his mic. "She looks like she's gonna faint if I sneeze too loud. Why couldn't we just evac the aid workers via local assets? Why send us politics? Jack, her father is some senator's donor or something. Just get her to the extraction point at Firebase Restrepo. Keep her safe. Keep her quiet. Don't let her touch anything sharp." Miller cut the feed. He hated babysitting missions. His team, roughly designated as Bravo 6, was a sledgehammer. They were designed to break doors and break people, not escort civilians through the deadliest valley on Earth. The bird touched down in a swirl of brown dust that blotted out the moon. The ramp lowered, and Miller was up, his rifle raised. "Move, go! Go! Go!" Eudora Brooks stumbled as she ran down the ramp, the weight of her medical rucksack pulling her off balance. She was small, perhaps 5'4", with messy brown hair tied back in a utilitarian bun. She wore standard-issue fatigues that were 2 sizes too big, and a flak jacket that looked like it was swallowing her whole. "Watch your step," Princess Sergeant Kowalski, the team's heavy weapons expert, yelled over the rotor wash, grabbing her arm and hauling her toward the tree line. Kowalski was a mountain of a man from Chicago who didn't believe in subtlety. They pushed through the dense brush, moving toward the temporary safe house established in an abandoned mud brick compound 2 clicks north. The plan was simple: hold the location until the secondary extraction chopper could arrive at dawn. The primary bird had mechanical issues and couldn't loiter. They were grounded for 6 hours in hostile territory. Once inside the compound, the mood was tense. The walls were thick, crumbling mud, smelling of old straw and unwashed bodies. Miller ordered a perimeter check while Eudora dropped her bag in the corner of the main room. She didn't say a word. She just knelt and began checking her supplies. Miller approached her, looming over her small frame. He wanted to establish the hierarchy immediately. "Look, Brooks, I don't know who you know in Washington, and I don't care. Tonight, you are luggage. You stay in this room. You don't go near the windows. You don't speak unless you're bleeding. Am I clear?" Eudora looked up. Her eyes were green, sharp, and surprisingly calm. There was no fear in them, which annoyed Miller. He expected tears, or at least the wide-eyed panic of a civilian realizing they might die. "Crystal, Chief," she said, her voice steady. "Just make sure your men stay out of my sterile field if I have to work. Infection kills faster than bullets sometimes." Miller scoffed. "If we're taking bullets, infection is the least of your worries. Just stay out of the way." He turned his back on her, dismissing her entirely. He walked over to Doc Sullivan, the team's actual medic. "Keep an eye on her, Doc. If she freaks out, sedate her. I can't have her screaming when the sun comes up." "She seems all right, boss," Sullivan murmured, cleaning his rifle scope. "Hands are steady, not shaking?" "Shock," Miller said. "It hasn't hit her yet. Wait until the first mortar drops." The night dragged on. The temperature plummeted, a biting cold that seeped through their tactical gear. The SEALs rotated watches, their movements fluid and silent. Eudora sat in the corner, wrapped in a thermal blanket, reading a small, battered paperback book. She didn't sleep. She just watched them. Around 0300 hours, Kowalski came in from the north wall, looking agitated. "Chief, I've got movement on the thermal. 2 clicks out, moving fast. It's not local goat herders." Miller moved to the window, peering through his own optics. The green phosphor screen showed heat signatures. Dozens of them. They weren't moving like a mob. They were moving like a formation. "That's a lot of heat," Miller whispered. "Graves, get me air support on the horn. We might have company." "Comms are patchy. Chief," Graves replied from the other side of the room, fiddling with the SATOCOM. "Atmospherics are garbage tonight. I can't get a lock on the bird." "Keep trying," Miller snapped. He turned to the room. "All right, boys, lock it down. We go suppressed until we can't. Brooks." Eudora looked up, marking her page before closing the book. "Yes. Put that helmet on and get under the table. If shooting starts, you kiss the dirt and you stay there. Do not move." "Understood," she said. She didn't scramble. She simply put on the helmet, adjusted the strap, and moved into the most fortified corner of the room, behind a stack of sandbags the previous occupants had left. Miller watched her for a split second, struck by a strange dissonance. She moved efficiently. Too efficiently for a nurse who spent her days vaccinating village kids. But the thought vanished as the first crack of a sniper rifle echoed through the valley. The bullet punched through the mud wall, missing Kowalski's head by inches and spraying dust over the map table. "Contact front!" Kowalski roared, bringing his M249 SAW machine gun up to the window. The silence of the Korengal was shattered. The night erupted into a chaotic symphony of muzzle flashes and shouting. The enemy wasn't just probing, they were assaulting, and they knew exactly where the Americans were. Miller fired 2 controlled bursts, dropping a silhouette in the distance. "They're bracketing us, Graves. Where is that air support?" "I can't get through. They're jamming us." "Someone out there has electronic warfare capabilities." Miller's blood ran cold. Taliban insurgents didn't have heavy jammers. This wasn't a random skirmish. This was a hit squad, and they were outnumbered 20-1. "Doc Kowalski, Hold the west wall. Don't let them flank us." As the firefight intensified, Miller glanced back at the corner. He expected to see the nurse curling into a ball, sobbing. Eudora Brooks was not crying. She was peering through a crack in the sandbags, watching the door. Her hand was resting on the medkit, but her eyes were scanning the room, calculating angles. "She's in shock," Miller told himself again. Total dissociation. He turned back to the window, raising his rifle. He had no idea that the woman behind him was counting the seconds between the enemy's reload cycles. He had no idea that the liability in scrubs was about to become the only reason any of them would survive the night. The engagement spiraled into madness within minutes. The mud compound, which had felt solid an hour ago, was disintegrating under the barrage of RPGs and heavy machine gun fire. The enemy was using PKM machine guns, walking the rounds through the walls like a chainsaw through drywall. "RPG!" Kowalski screamed. The explosion rocked the foundation. Dust and debris filled the air, choking the lungs. Miller was thrown against the far wall, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. He shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. "Sound off," he bellowed. "I'm good," Graves yelled, though blood was trickling from his nose. "Kowalski's up. Doc is hit, leg wound." Miller scrambled across the floor, staying low. Doc Sullivan was dragging himself behind a pillar, clutching his thigh. Bright arterial blood was pumping through his fingers. "Damn it," Miller cursed. He grabbed Doc's drag handle and pulled him deeper into cover. "Pressure, Doc. Put pressure on it." Suddenly, a small figure was there. Eudora. She slid across the floor on her knees, ignoring the bullets snapping over their heads. She didn't look terrified. She looked focused. She slapped Miller's hand away. "Move!" she ordered. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the battle like a knife. "Get back! Brooks, you're gonna get killed!" Miller shouted, trying to shove her back. "He's nicked the femoral!" she snapped, ripping open a packet of Kellogg's gauze with her teeth. "If I don't pack this now, he bleeds out in 3 minutes. Do you want him to live, or do you want to argue? Master Chief." Miller stared at her. The meek nurse was gone. In her place was a mechanic working on an engine. She jammed her fingers deep into the wound, packing the gauze with a brutal efficiency that made Miller wince. Doc screamed, thrashing in pain. "Hold him down!" Eudora roared at Miller. Miller obeyed instinctively, pinning Doc's shoulders. Eudora worked with blinding speed, applying a tourniquet high on the thigh and twisting the windlass until the bleeding stopped. She checked the pulse, checked the pupils, and wiped her bloody hands on her pants. "He's stable, but he can't fight," she said, looking Miller dead in the eye. "You're down a gun." Miller nodded, adrenaline pumping. "Get him to the back. Stay with him." "I'm staying where I'm needed," she countered. Before Miller could retort, the west wall exploded. A shaped charge blew a hole the size of a truck through the mud bricks. "Breach, breach, they're inside," Kowalski yelled, swinging his heavy machine gun around. The room filled with smoke and shouting. Insurgents poured through the hole, AK-47s blazing. The engagement distance collapsed from 300 meters to 3 meters. It was hand-to-hand, brutal and intimate. Miller dropped 2 targets with his sidearm, his rifle jammed with dust. Graves was wrestling with an insurgent on the floor, a knife flashing in the gloom. "Watch your 6!" Kowalski screamed, but he was overwhelmed, taking a round to the shoulder that spun him around. Miller cleared his jam and fired, but they were swarming. There were too many of them. The SEALs were elite, but math was math. 7 operators against 100 insurgents in a confined space. Miller took a hit to his ceramic plate that knocked the wind out of him. He fell back, gasping, his vision swimming. An insurgent loomed over him, raising a machete, screaming a war cry. Miller fumbled for his pistol, but his holster was empty. This is it, he thought. This is how it ends. Crack, crack. 2 shots. Precise. Controlled. The insurgent's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the floor, dead before he hit the ground. Miller blinked, looking past the falling body. Eudora Brooks was standing there. She was holding Doc Sullivan's sidearm. A Sig Sauer, P226. Her stance was perfect isosceles grip. Shoulders rolled forward, knees bent, both eyes open. She didn't look at the gun. She didn't look at Miller. She was already scanning for the next target. "Clear left," she called out, her voice utilizing the exact cadence of a tactical operator. Miller scrambled to his feet, staring at her as if she were an alien. Brooks. "Reloading," she announced calmly, dropping the magazine and slapping a fresh one in with a fluidity that took years to master. She racked the slide. "Chief, we need to collapse the perimeter to the inner room. The west wall is lost. Move." She grabbed the back of Miller's vest and yanked him toward the inner sanctum. "Go, I'll cover," she shouted. Miller didn't argue. His brain was trying to process the impossible, but his body knew to follow orders that made sense. He grabbed the injured Doc and dragged him into the back room. Graves and the bleeding Kowalski followed. Eudora backed into the room last, firing 3 suppression shots through the doorway to keep the heads down. She kicked the heavy wooden door shut and threw the bolt. The team was huddled in the dark, breathing hard. The air smelled of cordite and blood. What the hell was that? Graves wheezed, looking at Eudora. Eudora ignored him. She was checking the magazine of the pistol. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they blow this door. What's the ammo count?" The room went silent. The SEALs looked at each other, then at the nurse. "Who are you?" Miller asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Nurses don't shoot double taps. Nurses don't know how to call clear left." Eudora looked up. The innocent veneer was completely gone. Her face was hardened, her expression grim. She looked tired, but it was the tiredness of a predator, not prey. "My name is Eudora," she said, holstering the pistol. "And right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and a beheading video. Do we want to do introductions, or do we want to survive? We're almost out of ammo." Kowalski groaned, clutching his shoulder. "I've got 1 belt left for the SAW. "I have 2 mags, Graves said. "I'm dry on rifle," Miller admitted. 2 mags for the pistol." Eudora nodded, processing the data. She walked over to the small window in the back room that looked out over the cliff edge. It was a sheer drop, impossible to climb down without ropes. "They know we're trapped," Eudora said. "They'll wait us out or burn us out. They aren't in a rush." "We need that air support," Miller said, banging his fist on the wall. "They're jamming the frequency," Eudora said. She reached into her boot and pulled out a small, black device. It wasn't standard military issue. It looked like a modified transponder. But they aren't jamming the burst transmission bands used by other agencies. Miller narrowed his eyes. "What is that?" "It's a beacon," Eudora said. "But I need to get it to high ground. The signal won't punch out through these mud walls and the interference in the valley floor. It needs line of sight to the satellite." "The only high ground is the roof," Miller said. "And the roof is currently being chewed up by machine gun fire." "I know," Eudora said. She looked at Miller. "I'm the fastest runner here. You guys are weighed down by 40 pounds of ceramic and gear. I'm not." "You're not going out there," Miller growled. You're a civilian, Eudora laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Chief, that ship sailed 10 minutes ago when I saved your life. Now, give me a rifle. I need something with range. Miller hesitated. Every instinct in his training told him to protect the package. But the package had just saved his team, and she was holding a SAT beacon that didn't exist in any Navy inventory. He unslung his Mk-18, handed it to her, and unclipped his last 2 magazines. It pulls to the right slightly when it gets hot. Eudora took the weapon. She checked the chamber, verified the optic setting, and adjusted the stock length. She handled the weapon like it was an extension of her arm. "Cover me from the window," she said. "I'm going for the roof access." "Eudora," Miller said, grabbing her shoulder. "If you go up there, they will focus everything they have on you." "Good," she said, a cold smile touching her lips. "That means they won't be shooting at you while you patch up your boys." She turned and kicked the back door open. The moment Eudora stepped out into the courtyard, the world exploded again. Tracers zipped through the air like angry hornets. She moved with a frightening speed, sprinting low, using the debris of the courtyard as cover. Miller watched from the window, firing single shots to suppress the enemy positions on the ridge. "She moves like a damn cat," he muttered. Eudora reached the ladder leading to the flat mud roof. She slung the rifle and scrambled up, hand over hand. Bullets kicked up dust around her boots. "She's up," Miller yelled. "Kowalski, give her some noise." Kowalski, despite his bleeding shoulder, propped the saw on the window sill and let loose a long, roaring burst of fire, shredding the enemy positions to the north. It bought Eudora 3 seconds. On the roof, Eudora was exposed. It was a flat, killing field. She dove behind a crumbling chimney stack as rounds chipped away the mud brick inches from her face. She pulled the black beacon from her pocket and extended the antenna. She keyed the sequence. Red light, green light. "Signal is out," she yelled into her personal radio, which Miller realized she had swiped from Doc's vest. "Get back down," Miller screamed over the comms. "Negative," she replied, her voice strained. "I have to hold the handshake for 30 seconds or the satellite drops the packet. I'm pinned." Suddenly, the heavy wooden door to the roof access burst open. 3 insurgents rushed onto the roof, screaming. Miller couldn't get an angle from the window. "Eudora behind you." Eudora didn't panic. She dropped the beacon, leaving it to transmit. She rolled onto her back, bringing the Mk-18 up. Bang, 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 bang. 2 insurgents dropped, center mass hits. The third one, a giant of a man with a beard dyed red with henna, charged her with a knife, closing the distance before she could retarget. He kicked the rifle out of her hands. Miller watched in horror. "No." Eudora scrambled back, but the man lunged, slashing at her. She dodged, the blade slicing through her tactical vest but missing the skin. Then she did something that made Miller's jaw drop. As the man thrust again, she stepped into the attack. She trapped his arm, pivoted her hips, and executed a perfect Krav Maga takedown, using his own momentum to flip him over her shoulder. He hit the roof hard. Before he could recover, she drove her knee into his throat, crushing his windpipe. She drew a combat knife from her boot, a knife Miller hadn't even seen her conceal, and finished the fight in one fluid motion. She stood up, retrieving her rifle and the beacon. "Upload complete," she said breathlessly over the comms. "ETA on-air support is 2 minutes. Let's get ready to move." Miller slumped against the wall. He looked at Graves, who was staring at the ceiling in disbelief. "Graves," Miller said softly. "Remind me to never piss her off." Who is she? Jack? Graves asked. That wasn't self-defense class. That was operator-level stuff. Miller shook his head. I don't know, but I think we just found out why the CIA wanted her extracted so badly. The sound of jet engines roared overhead. The cavalry had arrived. The A-10 Warthog is a terrifying machine, a flying gun built around a 30mm rotary cannon. When it arrived over the Korengal Valley, the sound was not a roar, it was a tearing of the sky. Brrrt. The valley floor lit up as the depleted uranium shells decimated the tree line where the insurgents had been massing. Inside the mud compound, dust rained down from the ceiling like flour. Master Chief Miller didn't flinch. He just watched Eudora Brooks slide down the ladder from the roof, her face streaked with sweat and grime. The Mk-18 rifle held loosely in her right hand. She didn't look relieved. She looked annoyed. That bought us 20 minutes, she said, checking her watch. The pilot is Winchester on ammo. He's bugging out. We need to move before the dust settles. Miller walked over to her, his boots crunching on the debris. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, hard suspicion. He signaled for Graves and the wounded Kowalski to prep for movement. Then he cornered Eudora against the crumbling wall. Who are you? Miller asked again, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And don't give me the nurse line. I've worked with trauma nurses. They don't know how to uplink an encrypted burst transmission to a NSA satellite. That beacon. That's not standard kit. That's agency hardware. Eudora looked at him, her green eyes hard. She reached into her vest and pulled out a small, foil-wrapped energy bar, tearing it open with her teeth. Does it matter? Chief, we're alive. It matters, Miller growled, stepping closer. Because if you're agency, that means this isn't a rescue mission. It's a cleanup op, and my men are the janitors. Eudora stopped chewing. She swallowed hard, then sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. The facade of the innocent humanitarian finally cracked, revealing the steel beneath. My name is Eudora, she said quietly. But 10 years ago, my file didn't say Brooks. It said Operative 4 Alpha. I was intelligence support activity. The activity. Miller felt a chill. The ISA, the Army of Northern Virginia, was the unit that handled deep reconnaissance and human intelligence for Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. They were the ghosts. They operated in plain clothes, gathering intel in places the military couldn't officially go. I thought the activity was disbanded, Miller said. Parts of it, Eudora replied. Other parts just changed names. I got out 5 years ago. Too many ghosts. I became a nurse to try and save people for a change, to balance the ledger. So why are you here? Miller gestured to the burning valley outside. Why is a retired spook playing Florence Nightingale in the deadliest place on earth? Eudora looked toward the window. Because of him. Khalid al-Zaruni. The HVT. He's not just a warlord. Jack. He was my asset, Eudora revealed, the bitterness in her voice palpable. Back in 2008, I flipped him. I ran him for 3 years. He gave us everything: safe houses, bomb makers, courier routes. We thought he was our guy. She paused, her hand tightening on the rifle. We were wrong. He was playing us. He used our intel to eliminate his rivals and consolidate power. When he had what he wanted, he burned the network. He killed 3 of my team members in a botched meeting in Kandahar. I was the only one who walked away. Miller stared at her. The pieces were falling into place. The intensity of the attack, the jamming, the coordination. He knows you're here, Miller realized. He knows, Eudora confirmed. I came back under the cover of Doctors Without Borders because I caught wind that he was surfacing in this valley. I wasn't here to vaccinate kids. Chief, I was here to confirm his location so a Reaper drone could finish what I started. You used us as bait, Miller said, his anger rising. You got my team pinned down so you could get a fix on him. No, Eudora said sharply. I didn't call you. Washington did. Someone back at the Puzzle Palace saw my name on the roster and panicked. They sent you to pull me out before I could kill their former asset and cause a diplomatic incident. But Al-Zaruni saw the helos. He figured it out. She looked at Miller, her eyes pleading for the first time. He's not attacking this compound to take territory. He's attacking to kill me. As long as I'm with you, your team is a target. Miller processed this. He looked at Kowalski, who was pale and losing blood. He looked at Doc Sullivan, who was barely conscious. If we leave you, Miller said, you die. If you stay with me, Eudora countered, we all die. He has a battalion moving in from the south. That airstrike just pissed him off. Miller clenched his jaw. He was a SEAL. They didn't leave people behind. Not civilians, and sure as hell not Americans, regardless of their shadowy pasts. We move together, Miller said firmly. We're going to the secondary extraction point at Firebase Restrepo. It's 4 clicks uphill, through the enemy's backyard. It's suicide, Eudora said. It's a Tuesday, Miller retorted. Gear up, you're on point. You know this valley better than we do. Eudora looked at him, surprised. You trust me. I trust your aim, Miller said. And I trust that you want Al-Zaruni dead as much as I do. That makes us allies. Let's move. The trek to Firebase Restrepo was a nightmare crawl through hell. The moon had been swallowed by storm clouds, plunging the Korengol into pitch darkness. The team moved in a diamond formation, with Miller and Eudora at the front, and Graves and Doc dragging the semi-conscious Kowalski in the rear. Every step was agony. The terrain was steep, loose shale that slid under their boots, threatening to send them tumbling down the ravine. They moved silently, using hand signals, their night vision goggles painting the world in grainy green phosphor. Eudora moved with a terrifying grace. She didn't just walk, she flowed. She spotted tripwires that Miller missed. She identified choke points and steered them around potential ambush sites. It was clear she hadn't just studied this valley. She had lived in its shadows. 2 clicks in. The radio crackled. It was Al-Zaruni's voice, broadcasting over the open channel, taunting them. I see you, Eudora. I see your little soldiers. Do you remember Kandahar? Do you remember how they screamed? Miller keyed his mic, but Eudora stopped him. Don't engage, she whispered. He wants you to talk so he can triangulate our position. He's close, Graves whispered from the back. I can feel it. They reached a narrow pass, a fatal funnel where the trail cut between 2 sheer rock faces. It was the only way up to the firebase. Hold, Eudora signaled, dropping to a knee. She scanned the ridgeline. Something's wrong. No birds, no insects. It's too quiet. We have to push through, Miller said. Kowalski is fading. We need that evac. It's an ambush, Eudora insisted. He knows we have to come this way. We don't have a choice, Miller said. As if on cue, a flare popped overhead, bathing the pass in blinding white magnesium light. Contact. Miller screamed. The ridgeline erupted. Machine gun fire rained down from both sides. The SEALs dove for cover behind boulders, bullets sparking off the rocks inches from their heads. "They have the high ground," Graves yelled, firing blindly into the dark. "We're fish in a barrel." Eudora didn't fire. She was looking at the cliff face, analyzing the rock. Miller. The shale. The overhang. She pointed to a massive outcropping of loose rock directly above the enemy machine gun nest on the left ridge. "What about it?" Miller shouted, changing magazines. "If we hit it with a 40mm grenade, we can trigger a slide. It'll bury them. I'm out of 40mm, Miller yelled. "I'm not," Eudora shouted back. She scrambled over to Kowalski, who was slumped against a rock, clutching his SAW. She ripped the M203 grenade launcher off his vest, a backup weapon he carried. "Cover me," she ordered. Miller and Graves unleashed everything they had, suppressive fire that forced the enemy heads down for a split second. Eudora stood up, exposed. In the harsh light of the flare, she was a perfect target. She raised the launcher, adjusted the leaf sight, and took a breath. Thump! The grenade arced through the air. It wasn't aimed at the enemy soldiers. It was aimed at the stress fracture in the rock formation above them. The explosion was small, but the result was catastrophic. The grenade shattered the keystone of the unstable slope. With a groan that sounded like the earth splitting open, tons of rock, shale, and boulders detached from the cliff face. The enemy screams were cut short as the landslide thundered down, burying the machine gun nest and half the ambush team in a cloud of dust and stone. "Move while they're confused," Eudora yelled, tossing the launcher aside and grabbing her rifle. The team surged forward, scrambling over the debris of the landslide. The remaining insurgents on the right ridge were in disarray, shocked by the sudden collapse of their support. They broke through the pass, lungs burning, legs screaming. They were out of the kill zone, but they weren't safe yet. They reached the plateau, where Firebase Restrepo, a small, abandoned outpost, sat. It was little more than a circle of sandbags and a collapsed bunker, but it was defensible. "Set up the perimeter," Miller ordered. "Graves, get the beacon up again. We need that bird now." Eudora collapsed against a sandbag, gasping for air. She checked her rifle. "I have one mag left," she said. "I've got half a mag," Miller said. "I'm dry," Graves reported. "Pistol only." They were almost out of ammo, and in the distance, down the trail they had just climbed, they could see flashlights, hundreds of them. The main force was coming. "They're going to overrun us," Graves said, his voice flat. Eudora looked at the approaching lights. Then she looked at Miller. There was a strange calmness in her eyes now, a resolution. "They aren't coming for you," she said softly. "They're coming for me." "Don't even think about it," Miller warned her. "We fight together. You can't fight an army with pistols." "Jack," Eudora said. She stood up, checking the knife in her boot. "But you can distract them. What are you doing? Al-Zaruni wants a trophy," she said. "He wants to be the one to kill the spy who betrayed him. If I draw him out, if I make him come to me, his men will hold fire. They won't risk hitting him." "Eudora, no." Miller grabbed her arm. She looked at him, and for a fleeting second, the hardened operative vanished, and she was just a tired woman who had seen too much war. She placed her hand over his. "Get your men on that chopper, Master Chief," she said. "That's an order." She broke his grip and vaulted over the sandbags, sprinting not away from the enemy, but toward the flank, disappearing into the darkness of the heavy brush. "Eudora!" Miller screamed, but she was gone, and a moment later, a single voice rang out from the darkness, speaking perfect Pashto. challenging the warlord by name. The flashlights down the trail stopped. The shooting stopped. The entire enemy force turned toward the sound of her voice. She had just made herself the bait for the biggest trap of her life. Eudora Brooks didn't run blindly. Every step she took away from the firebase was calculated. She moved perpendicular to the enemy advance, drawing their eyes, their lights, and their hatred away from the battered SEAL team. She was screaming in Pashto, calling Khalid al-Zaruni a coward, a traitor to his own faith, a man who hid behind boys with rifles. It worked. The heavy machine gun fire that had been suppressing the SEALs lifted. The flashlights swiveled. The shouted orders changed from advance to capture. She led them into the Devil's Garden, a patch of ancient, jagged ruins about 300 meters east of the firebase. It was a maze of crumbled stone walls and deep cellar pits, a remnant of a Soviet-era outpost that had been destroyed decades ago. It was tight, claustrophobic, and perfect for one thing: a knife fight. She slid into a narrow gap between two fallen pillars, her chest heaving. She had no ammunition left. Her rifle was empty. Her pistol was gone. All she had was the Ka-Bar combat knife she had taken from the dead insurgent on the roof, and a single flash-bang grenade she had lifted from Kowalski's vest. "Come out!" "Eudora!" Al-Zaruni's voice echoed off the stones. He was close. "There is nowhere to run. My men have the perimeter. Surrender, and I will make it quick." Eudora didn't answer. She slowed her breathing, forcing her heart rate down. This was the dead space, that moment of absolute stillness before violence. She gripped the knife, the leather handle slick with sweat. She heard boots crunching on gravel. One pair, heavy, confident. Al-Zaruni stepped into the small courtyard of the ruins. He was flanked by two bodyguards, but he waved them back. He wanted this personal. He held a gold-plated Makarov pistol in one hand and a long, curved dagger in the other. "You look tired. 4 Alpha," he sneered, using her old call sign. The years have not been kind. Eudora stepped out from the shadows. She stood tall, her hands empty, the knife tucked behind her back. "And you look like a man who knows he's already dead," she said softly. Al-Zaruni laughed. "Dead, look around you. I have an army. You have nothing. I have the truth. Khalid, I know where the money went. I know about the accounts in Zurich. I know who you sold the Stinger missiles to." His smile vanished. "That information dies with you." He raised the pistol. Eudora didn't flinch. She just watched his finger tighten on the trigger. Now. She dropped the flashbang grenade at her own feet. Bang! The explosion was blinding in the confined space. The sound was a physical blow. Al-Zaruni screamed, clutching his eyes, firing the pistol blindly into the air. The two bodyguards staggered back, disoriented. Eudora, who had squeezed her eyes shut and covered her ears a split second before the detonation, moved. She didn't lunge for the gun. She lunged for the man. She slammed into Al-Zaruni, driving him back into the stone wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He slashed wildly with the dagger, the blade cutting a deep gash across her forearm, but she didn't let go. She trapped his knife arm, pinning it against the stone. "You should have stayed in the shadows," he screamed, head-butting her. Blood poured into Eudora's eyes, blinding her. She felt her nose break. The pain was blinding, a white-hot spike in the center of her skull. But she held on. She drove her knee into his groin, then hooked her leg behind his, sweeping him to the ground. They hit the dirt hard, a tangle of limbs and rage. It wasn't a tactical fight anymore. It was a brawl. He was stronger, heavier. He rolled on top of her, his hands closing around her throat, squeezing the life out of her. Die! He spat, his face inches from hers. Eudora's vision started to tunnel. The edges of the world went black. She couldn't breathe. She clawed at his face, but his grip was iron. This is it, she thought. This is the end. But then, her hand brushed against something on the ground. A shard of rusted metal from the old Soviet ruins. Sharp, jagged. She gripped it, with the last ounce of strength she had. She didn't strike at his face. She struck at the brachial artery in his arm, the one holding the dagger. She drove the metal shard deep. Al-Zaruni roared, rearing back, blood spurting from his arm. His grip on her throat loosened for a fraction of a second. That was all she needed. She sucked in a desperate breath, bucked her hips, and threw him off. She scrambled on top of him, reversing the position. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the fallen dagger from the dirt and drove it down. Once, silence fell over the ruins. Eudora slumped forward, her forehead resting on his chest. She was gasping, choking on dust and blood. Around her, the sounds of the battle seemed to drift away. Eudora. It was Miller's voice, distant, distorted. She tried to answer, but nothing came out. She rolled off the body, lying on her back, looking up at the sky. The clouds were breaking. A single star was visible. The two bodyguards, recovering from the flashbang, raised their rifles. They saw their leader dead. They saw the woman who killed him lying defenseless. They leveled their weapons. Thwip, thwip, thwip. The sound wasn't gunfire. It was the chopping of rotor blades. Suddenly, the ruins were bathed in a blinding spotlight from above. A wind like a hurricane kicked up the dust. A minigun roared from the heavens, the breath of God. A stream of red tracers poured down from the black shape hovering above, tearing the two bodyguards apart before they could pull their triggers. The extraction team had arrived. The sheer violence of salvation is a sound you never forget. When the minigun from the hovering MH-60 Black Hawk opened up, it didn't sound like a weapon. It sounded like the fabric of the sky tearing apart. The breath of God, as the operators called it, painted the ancient ruins in a strobe light of red tracers, obliterating the two bodyguards who stood over Eudora's broken form. Dust, kicked up by the rotor wash, swirled into a blinding, choking vortex. The helicopter flared hard, its wheels nearly scraping the crumbling stone walls as it hovered inches off the ground. Clear we are clear, move. Graves screamed over the comms, his voice cracking with the adrenaline dump. Master Chief Jack Miller didn't wait for the bird to settle. He was already moving, scrambling over the loose shale and debris, his knees sliding in the dirt as he reached the center of the ruins. He fell beside Eudora, his hands trembling for the first time in 20 years of combat. She looked small. The tactical vest that had seemed too big for her earlier was now shredded. Dark stains blossoming across the fabric. Her face, usually so composed, was pale and streaked with blood and grime. The fire that had driven her through the night, the fire that had led her to face a warlord with nothing but a knife, was flickering out. "Eudora, stay with me!" Miller roared, his voice fighting the deafening whine of the turbine engines. He ripped the Velcro of his medical pouch open, his fingers fumbling with a pressure dressing. "Don't you dare quit on me now! You hear me? That's an order." Her eyelids fluttered. They were heavy, weighed down by shock and blood loss. But she forced them open. The piercing green of her irises was hazy, unfocused, drifting toward the gray of the sky. Then her eyes found his. A faint, bloody smile touched the corner of her lips, a ghost of the defiance she had shown in the compound. "I told you, Chief," she wheezed, the sound wet and rattling in her chest. "Infection kills. Faster than bullets." "Shut up," Miller choked out, pressing the gauze hard against the deep laceration on her arm. "Save your breath. We're going home." "Graves Kowalski." "Get the litter," Miller shouted over his shoulder, his face twisted in a mask of desperation. They moved with the frantic precision of men who knew they were losing a friend. Graves and Doc Sullivan slammed the collapsible litter onto the ground. They rolled her onto it with agonizing care, trying to stabilize her neck, her arm, her everything. They loaded her into the belly of the Black Hawk, the floor slick with hydraulic fluid and dust, the SEALs Miller, Graves, the wounded Kowalski, and Doc piled in after her, collapsing against the bulkheads as the bird lifted off. The pilot banked hard to the left, pulling G-forces that pressed them into the floor, dodging the last sporadic bursts of ground fire from the valley below. Miller didn't strap in. He sat on the floor beside the litter, his hand gripping hers so tight his knuckles turned white. He didn't care about protocol. He didn't care that the crew chief was yelling at him to buckle up. He looked at her hand. It was rough, calloused, the fingernails broken and dirty. It was the hand of a fighter, not a nurse. "You saved us," Miller said, shouting to be heard over the screaming engines. He leaned close to her ear, needing her to hear this one truth before the darkness took her. "You saved my whole team. You took the heat. You took the hit." Eudora turned her head slightly. The effort seemed to cost her everything she had left. She squeezed his hand, a weak, fluttering pressure. She whispered, her voice barely audible even this close. "We saved each other. Jack." Then the grip went slack. Her head lolled to the side. The rise and fall of her chest hitched, then stopped. Doc Miller yelled, the panic exploding in his chest like a grenade. "She's crashing." Doc Sullivan threw himself across the cabin, ripping open an IV kit. "No pulse. She's in hypovolemic shock. I need fluids. Now, Graves, hold the line." Miller watched helplessly as Doc worked, his hands flying in a blur of medical intervention. He watched the life drain out of the woman who had single-handedly turned the tide of the battle. The helicopter sped into the night, racing toward Bagram, racing against a reaper that felt inevitable. Miller bowed his head, staring at the blood on his own hands, her blood, and prayed to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. Bagram Airfield. 3 days later. The hospital at Bagram was a different kind of war zone. It was sterile, white, and smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, a jarring, violent contrast to the mud, sweat, and copper tang of blood in the Korangal. Master Chief Jack Miller sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area of the surgical ward. He had been there for 72 hours. He hadn't showered. He hadn't changed his uniform. The dust of the valley was still embedded in the fibers of his pants. He sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at a scuff mark on the linoleum floor, replaying the duel in the ruins over and over in his mind. Every time the double doors swung open, his head snapped up. Every time, it was a nurse or a doctor walking past, their faces masks of professional detachment. Finally, the doors opened, and the air in the room changed. It wasn't a doctor. It was a man in a charcoal suit that cost more than Miller's annual salary. He was clean-shaven, holding a manila folder, and he moved with the quiet, terrifying confidence of the bureaucracy that ran the wars from air-conditioned rooms in Dia Ojistohosieski. "Master Chief Miller," the suit asked. His voice was polite, but cold. Miller stood up slowly. His joints popped. Where is she? Where is Brooks? The man adjusted his tie, stopping a respectful distance away. There is no Eudora Brooks here. Chief. Miller felt a spike of rage, hot enough to melt steel. He stepped forward, invading the man's personal space, looming over him. Don't give me that spook talk. I pulled her off that bird. I watched the trauma team work on her for 6 hours before they kicked me out. I want to know if she's alive. The man didn't flinch. He looked around the empty waiting room, ensuring they were alone, then leaned in. The bureaucratic mask slipped just a fraction. Eudora Brooks died in a tragic humanitarian aid accident 3 days ago, the man said, reciting the lie with practiced smoothness. Her convoy was hit by an IED. Her body is being flown back to Dover as we speak. Her family has been notified. The press release goes out in an hour. Miller froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. She didn't make it. He felt the floor tilt. After everything, the ambush, the landslide, the duel, she had died on a sterile table. The man in the suit watched Miller carefully. He saw the devastation in the SEAL's eyes. He sighed, a small, human sound that broke the character of the unfeeling agent. He closed the distance, lowering his voice to a whisper that barely carried across the gap between them. The woman you knew. The nurse. She's gone. Chief, she has to be. Miller looked up, confusion warring with his grief. What are you saying? I'm saying that the woman who took down a Tier 1 target with a knife and a flashbang, she has work to do. Valuable work. And people like her. They don't get to retire. They don't get to have names. And they certainly don't get to be alive on public records. The realization washed over Miller slowly. It wasn't a death notification. It was a recruitment pitch. Or rather, a reactivation. She's alive, Miller breathed. She is in critical condition, but stable, the man corrected, his voice devoid of emotion again. She was transported to an undisclosed location in Germany an hour ago. She will undergo reconstructive surgery and extensive rehabilitation. When she wakes up, Eudora Brooks will be a memory. Miller stared at him. They're erasing her. Again. It's what she does, Chief. It's who she is. The shadows are safer for her now. Al-Zaruni had friends. If they knew she survived, they would never stop hunting her. Can I see her? Miller asked, a desperate hope in his voice. Just for a second. Just to say. Say what? The man shook his head slowly. She's already gone, Jack. You know the rules. No contact. No paper trail. It keeps her safe. It keeps you safe. The man turned to leave. The meeting concluded. But then he stopped. He reached into his jacket pocket. However, the man said, before the sedation kicked in, she made me promise to give you this. She was, quite insistent. Said you'd know what it meant. He handed Miller a small, fabric object. It was the Velcro patch from her uniform, the white circle with the red logo of Doctors Without Borders. It was stained with dirt and dried blood. Fraying at the edges, Miller took it, his thumb brushing over the rough embroidery. He turned it over. On the back, written in black permanent marker, were numbers, coordinates, not for a battlefield and not for a safe house. 48.2082 degrees north, 16.3738 degrees east. Below the coordinates was a date, 6 months from today, and 2 words, Café Central. Miller looked up, but the man in the suit was already walking away, his shoes clicking rhythmically on the linoleum, disappearing through the double doors without looking back. Miller stood alone in the silence of the hospital. He looked at the coordinates again. He knew them. Vienna. He felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth, a real smile. The first one in days. The weight in his chest lifted. She wasn't just alive, she was planning ahead. She was still the operator, still 3 moves ahead of everyone else. He walked out of the hospital, pushing through the heavy glass doors into the blinding Afghan sunlight. The heat hit him, carrying the smell of dust and diesel fuel. The war was still going. The helicopters were still flying. The valley was still there, waiting to claim more souls. But for the first time in a long time, Master Chief Jack Miller didn't feel like a soldier trapped in an endless cycle. He felt like a man with a destination. He tucked the patch into his breast pocket, right next to his heart, patting it once to make sure it was secure. "See you in Vienna." "Nurse," he whispered to the wind. War stories are often about the loud moments, the explosions, the gunfire, the screaming. But the real stories, the ones that echo long after the smoke clears, are about the quiet moments of courage that happen when no one is watching. Eudora Brooks wasn't just a nurse, and she wasn't just a soldier. She was a guardian in the truest sense. She proved that the deadliest weapon on a battlefield isn't a rifle or a drone. It's the human spirit refusing to break. The official report of that night in the Korangal Valley is classified. If you look up the mission logs, you'll find redacted lines and black ink. You won't find her name. But the men of Bravo 6 know the truth. They know that when the devil came for them, an angel in scrubs picked up a rifle and sent him back to hell. And somewhere out there, in the shadows where the cameras don't go, she's still fighting, watching, waiting, because heroes don't always wear capes, and they don't always get medals. Sometimes they just get a new mission. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. It helps us bring more hidden histories to light. Do you think the government was right to erase her identity to keep her safe? Or did she deserve a hero's welcome? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more true stories of unsung heroes and classified missions, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a briefing. Until next time, stay safe.